Hello and welcome to today's TOC podcast. I'm Joe Weichert, co-chair of O'Reilly's Tools of Change conference. I'd like to remind you that you can keep up on all the upcoming TOC events, including webcasts and podcasts, by visiting the conference website, toccon.com. TOC Frankfurt is the next in-person event on the schedule, and it's less than a month away. This year features not only the full-day TOC event on Tuesday, October 11th, but also a half-day social media workshop on Thursday the 13th. For more information or to register, visit toccfrankfurt.com. For today's podcast, I'm joined by Evan Dahl, co-founder of Flipboard, the extremely popular iPad app. Evan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
So, what are some of the lessons you learned about software design and specifically user interface design from your days at Apple?
Sure. So, I guess the biggest thing that always comes to mind when you're designing software with kind of the Apple mindset is every time you present the user with a non-essential decision to make, you have failed as a designer. So rather than giving lots of options and settings and giving the user lots and lots of knobs and dials to twiddle, if you can figure out what the right value is for a lot of the different defaults in an application, that's really the preferred approach. One example of that was back when the sort of jiggle effect for reordering apps within Springboard was being designed. They gave a special version of the iPhone to Steve, and he was able to customize the exact amount of the jiggle and the wiggle and the bounce when you're reordering icons. And he picked the right values, and then those were, that was exactly how those icons ended up moving. The other thing is really Apple is as much a culture of shipping as much as a culture of design. So one way that this influences the design is that you can always add it later. Just because it's something that seems obvious or that seems possible doesn't mean that you need to ship it, or at least it doesn't mean that you need to ship it right away. So rather than saying no to some great feature, you can say yes, but not right now. So the first iPhone is shipped without copy and paste. It's shipped without an app store. It only shipped with one page of apps. So a lot of these things that we think of as being totally essential and obvious right now for the iPhone didn't come out with it in version 1, and that's really important.
So that's kind of reminds me of the minimum viable product concept in the agile development world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, minimum viable products are definitely something that we've thought about a lot. We sort of have an alternate phrase internally where we talk about a minimum awesome product.
Okay.
You don't want it to be so minimal that it's like cut to the bone and it's just like this uninspiring utilitarian thing. So I mean that's sort of that has influenced our design process throughout.
Okay, I like your minimum awesome product better than MVP. So, and you also have taught iPhone app dev courses at Stanford, right? So did that influence much of the design of Flipboard as well?
That's a good question, actually. So I taught the iPhone app development course at Stanford in fall of 2008 and spring of 2009. I guess certainly one thing that teaching, generally speaking, gets into your head is that just because something is obvious to you, that doesn't mean it's going to be obvious to the person that you're explaining it to. There's this gulf of knowledge that occurs where the better you know something, the harder it is for you to explain it to someone else, and that manifests itself the first time a user launches your application. You've been designing this thing; it's inside your head. You know every single little nook and cranny of it, and the better you know it, the harder it's going to be for you to remember what it was like seeing this application for the very first time without any knowledge of what it is. And that's something that we're still spending a lot of time iterating on and working on. The things that seem obvious really aren't a lot of the time. One way that we sort of try and attack that is by trying to use data and to make educated decisions about, okay, is this button ever being pressed, or rather than just trying to speculate about whether a feature is discoverable or not, or understandable or not. And you see that being done on the web a lot as well.
So are you doing that a lot then within Flipboard? So when I use it every day and I'm using different features and ignoring others, somewhere that's all being tallied up and compared to other users?
There's some amount of anonymized, just usage stats that get sent up. You've seen as well. Companies like Microsoft, they were talking about the design of the Windows Explorer window and how they've made certain decisions around what buttons should exist and which ones shouldn't, based on sort of aggregate usage. If a button's never being pressed, you should remove it from the UI. I think that's one of the, just because something exists in a version of your app doesn't mean that it has to exist forever going forward.
Yep. Yeah, that totally makes sense. How about all these user interface experience lessons for book publishers, which is our primary crowd here? Anything that you've seen? I'm thinking, for example, of like travel guides, and I could see how a Flipboard-like interface could take that static content from a print travel guide, and if you could draw in like live feeds of those destinations, things that are happening now there, and
Right.
pour it into a Flipboard type. Is that a viable way to extend this platform, and are you looking at any other ways?
Sure, sure. So I guess in response to the first question, the advice that I would give is to try and be fundamentally social. If you try and take an existing product and you sort of tack social on and you sort of glue it to the side of the window, that's not truly a social product. Um, it's got to be intrinsic to the product. So the way we've actually looked at Flipboard is that it's a browser and it's an inherently social browser. But it's taken our concept of what a browser is and sort of reimagined it from the ground up. As far as things like travel and book publishing and all that. I mean, I think ultimately we want Flipboard to be a great platform for all this sort of stuff. So rather than saying, okay, company X is going to be the Flipboard of travel, we want Flipboard to be the Flipboard of travel, and we want it to be a place where if you're doing travel writing, if you're in that space, we want you to be able to come to Flipboard and get that content into Flipboard in a really really beautiful, really easy way, and have it all be in one place.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other thing I would say is that going it alone, by going out and making a totally custom app, I mean, it can have a huge upside. It also means a big ongoing investment in engineering and design and community. So one thing that we've seen actually is that you don't necessarily have to choose between doing your own app and then working with someone like Flipboard. The New Yorker is a great example. They have their own kind of bespoke iPad application, which is really great. But they also work with us at Flipboard. They're one of our publishing partners. We've got 50 publishing partners who their content is displayed in an enhanced way within Flipboard, and they have the option to do advertising. So it's kind of best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think you just raised a really good point, though, too. I want to go back on is the notion of storefronts, right? And it doesn't just have to be one storefront. So Flipboard can be a storefront, and then you can push that content out elsewhere. But I guess the key takeaway is that Flipboard is an interesting, evolving, and emerging storefront that all publishers should really take a closer look at.
Yeah, I like to think so, for sure. I mean, we think of it as a browser, and you don't imagine that a publication that you want to read is going to require you to download a whole new web browser. You can access it all in one place, and we want to be that for this post iPad HTML5 social media world. I mean, a lot has changed since the first web browsers were created.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I usually start my day looking at Google News. That's sort of my resource there. And in fact, I almost never go directly to a newspaper site unless it's through a link like Google News. And I'd love to be able to read Google News in Flipboard. So is there any chance that might be happening down the road?
It's definitely one of those things that's been on our list for a while. We don't specifically support Google News right now. We do support sort of any number of customized news sources. I mean, you can add any news source that's on Twitter, that's on Facebook, that's on RSS into your Flipboard as a feed. So one actually great way of doing this is to create a Twitter list. We really think that Flipboard is like one of the great avenues for using Twitter lists. So you can create a Twitter list of your favorite news sources. You can throw in science and tech and sports and whatever your favorite news sources are, and then you can add that Twitter list as a section within your Flipboard. It's great for news, but also any sort of a vertical. Our CEO is really into classic wooden boats, so he's created his own classic wooden boats Twitter list, and he reads that. Our designer is really into sort of extreme travel and backpacking and overland trekking. So whatever you're into, you can read that as a Flipboard section.
Okay, makes sense. So, even though I love it obviously on my iPad, I'm about to switch to the Android platform for both phone and tablet. And
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that Flipboard might just be an iPad only app going forward. Is that true, or is there any hope for the Android platform?
We're not sort of religiously committed to any one platform. We do think that the iPad is far and away the best tablet platform out there right now. I mean, we made a decision very early on. Initially we thought that Flipboard was going to be a web app living within a traditional web browser, and then the iPad was announced, and we sort of took this leap and said it'd be really cool if we just sort of launched it with the iPad and launched this new sort of an application on this brand new platform, and I think that worked out really well for us. And users I think are have the same opinion. I mean, the iPad is still the dominant. It's pretty much the only serious tablet platform. That being said, it's definitely something we're thinking about. We're open-minded and we're pragmatic about it. There were some rumors on TechCrunch about an Amazon tablet last week. It'll definitely be interesting to us if there's a really killer Android tablet that starts to get some traction. We will have our eyes open, and we'll be ready to start typing.
Yeah, well, that Amazon one is the one I'm waiting for, so that's my cutover point. But nevertheless, I guess in the short term, I may have to hang on to my iPad for, apps like yours and a few others that aren't there yet. So if that's the worst of it, that's not so bad. So, well, Evan Dahl from Flipboard, thank you so much for joining us
Sure
for
thing.
this TOC podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.